articulating the cause of the social field. Any theory of social change with political aspirations faces an apparently insurmountable task. On the one hand, it must provide a credible causal analysis that targets the source of social problems. On the other hand, achieving such credibility seems impossible in the face of the complexity of the interactions among social actors and contingent conditions. Only from God's perspective can the sheer number of interrelated variables within the complex social space resolve themselves into neat bundles, making it possible to differentiate cause from effect. And we can add further difficulties. To construct a plausible scenario of social change, we would have to have some means of following effects through time, in all their manifold concatenations, to discover their origin in a significant cause. We would also have to have some means of judging which effects are more significant and for which period of time. How, for example, are we to analyze the determinants of any given social fact, say, the poverty of children in America, in the face of a plethora of possible historical, economic, ideological, biological, familial, personal, and environmental factors, if we cannot isolate, at least provisionally and theoretically, a domain of causes prior to and independent of the effects they produce? Distinguishing cause from effect scientifically seems to be the sine qua non of a politically relevant theory of social change. Marx's signal achievement in this respect was his description of a social field split into two tiers, base and superstructure, allowing for the scientific disentanglement of cause from effect, and thus addressing the problem of causes being indistinguishable from effects. But in the absence of some transcendental position from which to make that distinction, the sequestration of causes from the effects they produce creates a fatal separation, such that nothing remains to guarantee the very connection one has set out to explain, namely, the link between the cause and the field of effects. For if the cause is radically other than its effects, if it is not in some way part of the field it produces, then it cannot be seen in relation to that field as its cause. In fact, the field itself threatens to fall apart, since nothing holds its elements together in relation to each other. In response to this problem, later Marxist theorizing takes on the task of articulating plausible mechanisms by which a cause might be brought back into touch with its effects. In Marxian theories, such mechanisms include the intellectual's role in transforming class consciousness, Althusser's emphasis on overdetermination, Gramsci's invention of hegemony, and Williams' attempts to rethink the base. As we shall see in Chapter 3, Pierre Bourdieu invents the concept of the habitus, an embodied set of durable predispositions installed by external conditions, explicitly to serve this purpose. But perhaps the effort best known to North American readers is Michel Foucault's theory of imminent power relations.
It seems to me that power must be understood in the first instance as the multiplicity of force relations immanent in the sphere in which they operate and which constitute their own organization, as the process which, through ceaseless struggles and confrontations, transforms, strengthens, or reverses them, as the support which these force relations find in one another, thus forming a chain or a system, or on the contrary, the disjunctions and contradictions which isolate them from one another, and lastly, as the strategies in which they take effect, whose general design or institutional crystallization is embodied in the state apparatus, in the formulation of the law, in the various social hegemonies. 2.
By this means, Foucault links causes directly with their effects. Unfortunately, in this model, cause and effect are brought so closely together that the two tiers collapse into one. Anything can be a cause of anything or everything else in this moving substrate of force relations. 3. In so doing, cause once again becomes indistinguishable from effect, dissolved within the very positivity of the relation it supposedly produces. It would seem that we must accept either the flaw of non sequitur in the Marxian transcendentalist model or the flaw of non-differentiation in the Foucaultian immanentist model. In order to address this set of problems, Joan Kopjek has taken up the challenge of articulating a psychoanalytic position against Foucault and his followers. She locates the crux of their disagreement by showing that the model of social relationality, which underwrites Foucault's analyses of the implication of power and knowledge and serves as the standard for cultural studies, reduces society to its immanent power relations, which are identified in terms of positive categories or properties. In this way, Foucault avoids the Marxian error of locating the principle of social regulation outside the realm of the social, but commits the reciprocal error of failing to provide any place from which resistance could be mounted. As Kopjek puts it,
While the Foucauldian focus on relations of power and knowledge is widely hailed as a necessary corrective to more naive political theories, we will contend that his reduction of society to these relations is problematic. Power was no longer conceived by Foucault as an external force that exerted itself on society, but is immanent within society, the fine, differentiated, continuous network of uneven relations that constituted the very matter of the social now. It is with this notion of immanence, this conception of a cause that is immanent within the field of its effects, with which this book quarrels and repeatedly condemns as historicist. We are calling historicist the reduction of society to its indwelling network of relations of power and knowledge. 4.
Kopchak agrees with Falcao's criticism of the Marxian solution, explaining that there cannot be some exception to the field of relations that causes all the others while being itself immune to causation. A great advantage of the Foucauldian solution is that causes, powers, subsist within the field in question. All the same, Falcao's attempts to avoid importing some transcendent externality lead him to adopt a model that not only cannot satisfactorily distinguish cause from effect but also, and on that account, cannot provide for any resistance to the system itself that does not translate back into the power that is the target of that resistance. Subjects determined by the immanent relations of the system can never stand in a position counter to that system, determined as they are by it. In this scenario, no element remains undetermined, that is, contingent and thus potentially subversive of the system. Academic historicists allied under the banner of cultural studies have responded to this criticism by pointing out that the contingency minimally required for resistance to the determining system could arise from the multiplicity of discourses circulating within it. No subject is determined unilaterally by one discourse, so the inevitable discordances among the various discourses determining the subject can provide for a new entity, one not predictable from the component discourses. Unfortunately, however, in the Foucaultian model, the very conflict that is taken to signal the subject's non-determination, its potential positioning against its determinations, proves to be the means by which knowledge and power are produced and consolidated, the very means, in other words, which situate the subject in its determinations. The lines of power that run through the social field are productive of subjects, not just of prohibitions on them. What is more, this productive power works in more than one direction simultaneously, so that what looks like a prohibition actually conceals a formative force. Kopchak makes the point this way.
The simple atomization and multiplication of subject positions and this party's extra party's description of conflict does not lead to a radical undermining of knowledge or power. Not only is it the case that at each stage what is produced is conceived in Foucauldian theory to be a determinate thing or position, but, in addition, knowledge and power are conceived as the overall effect of the relations among the various conflicting positions and discourses. Differences do not threaten panoptic power. They feed it. 5.
In sum, the Foucaultian solution is ultimately resistant to resistance, unable to conceive of a discourse that would refuse rather than refuel power. 6. Foucault's model of power cannot deliver a plausible account of social change. So, until recently, social theorists have articulated their positions vis-a-vis two opposed causal models. One describing the causes exceptional to the field of its effects, a two-tier model, and one describing the causes entangled within a field of causes indistinguishable from their effects, a one-tier model. For convenience, I refer to these as the model of external causation and the model of imminent causation. They are strictly complementary, each attempts to correct the deficits of the other. Marxism is a good example of external causation. The field of effects, superstructure, is analytically distinct from its underlying cause, economic base, which appears as an exception to the field. But the separation of cause and effect for the purposes of analysis brings its own problems. For one, in the lived social world such distinctions are very difficult to make, and, for another, once cause is separated from effect, it is difficult to account for the links between them, that is, as Hume noted, it is difficult to find the very causation of causality. Another way to put this is to say that external causation reifies the cause as being so entrenched and having such dominance that the prospect of altering it seems impossible. Imminent causation, exemplified in the work of Falcao and Deleuze, and sometimes going under the name of neo-Spinozism, treats causes and effects as mutually conditioning one another within the same field. In this way, imminent causation rectifies the problems that devil external causation by more adequately reflecting the state of affairs in the social world and by accepting the possibility of reciprocal causes. But imminent causation has its own drawbacks because the model provides no means for distinguishing causes from their consequences in a way that would enable an analysis. Put another way, the sheer volume and volatility of particulars makes it unlikely that one can find the lever for change. While partisans of one approach may argue for the superiority of their chosen model, including all the ways that a given advance on their side vitiates any criticism from the other, their counterpartisans are quick to demonstrate how these so-called advances are simply the old model tricked out in new clothes. So, for example, when Althusser proposes to avoid the causal traps of classical Marxist thought via the mechanism of overdetermination of superstructural elements, his immanentist critics have no problem discerning his continued reliance on just those aspects of Marxist causality that he claims to have left behind. They are right, but so too are the critics of the new immanentism propounded by theorists such as Deleuze, Hart and Negri. It has seemed impossible to overcome this divide. The disciplinary boundaries between history and sociology, to take one salient example, exemplify this dichotomy, which then gets played out within each discipline. As in the question of the priority of agency versus structure, see, for example, Gedden's The Constitution of Society. Once we see the complementary nature of these two models, however, an opening appears. The challenge is to theorize a cause that is both exceptional to the social field, a la the Marxist meta-cause, and internal to the field, a la the Foucaultian imminent cause. Such an external-internal Extimate cause not only has to supply a means of keeping cause and effect distinct, unlike the causal field in the Foucaultian model, it must also forge a link between cause and effect within the social field of effects. Unlike the Marxist model, thanks to the work of a number of talented theorists, this third option is available. Departing from long-standing dissatisfactions with the dominant paradigms of the structure and function of social power represented by Marx and Falcao, and aligning themselves against sheer empirical studies, these theorists establish the need for an alternative model of social space, power, and causality. They tackle head-on the problem of theorizing what is apparently an incomprehensible complexity by identifying a type of external-internal causality -1, refer to it as Extimate causality for reasons that will become clear in a moment. It will be the burden of this book to show that Extimate causality has the special property of producing and disseminating a certain type of excess that is central to the establishment and maintenance of the social field itself. Speaking in terms of the social arena, we could describe the significance of Extimate causality in the following way. We have seen that social relations depend upon retroversive signification, which is one way of saying that the social dimension of subjectivity is a remedy. Ably excessive. Extimate causality names the operation that generates subjects in their social dimension, that is, the operation that gives us social identities, properties, and relationships. In producing the social subject, Extimate causality also leaves a remainder or indeterminacy, so that every subject bears some unspecifiable excess within the social field. Every subject is an excessive subject. For convenience, I refer to this excessive subject, the subject born of and bearing excess, as the Mobius subject, because the topology of the Mobius band, with its apparently impossible configuration of two sides that turn out to be the same, provides a convenient model for understanding how, at every point in the social field, an irreducible excess attends social relations, as we will see in Chapter 2. In fact, although it seems paradoxical, this excess is what makes the systematicity of the social field itself possible and hence susceptible to analysis. For example, we can never know for certain what others think of us, but this inability is precisely what makes it necessary for us to continue to participate in the social field itself, for the social field is the only place in which we can even try to find out what we mean to others. We could say that the excess produced by the extimate cause of subjectivity is both the obstacle to our knowing our meaning as social beings and the necessary ingredient of the social field within which we obtain the only meaning that we will ever have, however uncertain. The key contribution made by these theorists involves their unique handling of this excess. Other theories of social change, subject formatting, and political alliance may acknowledge it without however understanding the production of the excess by the operation of extimate causality. But they invariably conceive of its elimination as necessary to their projects because it seems to them that the excess of each subject stands only as an obstacle to secure self-knowledge, solidarity, or stable political regimes. However, as theorists of extimate causality make clear, the excess is ineradicable. Hence any theory of social change must either find a way to include it or doom itself to rehearsing the same problems.
Like, follow, subscribe.